There we go. We're live. Hi, everybody. Very happy to introduce you to Peter Hain, who is returning to us for a chat, which is very exciting. And you're going to start us off with an introduction to yourself and the elephant conspiracy.
Well, this is the elephant conspiracy. Here we are. Good evening, everybody. I'll try and hold it up properly. I'm Peter Hain, Lord Hain. I was an MP for a quarter of a century, MP for Neath. I'm speaking to you from South Wales, from my home. I'm now in the House of Lords. I was 50 years ago an anti-apartheid campaign leader who stopped the 1970 cricket tour by leading a mass movement taking non-violent direct action. My childhood was spent in Pretoria in South Africa, the son of brave white anti-apartheid activists, and we were propelled into exile. And my life has been in Britain since the mid-1960s as a result. And the elephant conspiracy is a sequel to the rhino conspiracy, which is a thriller based on poaching of wildlife by international criminal syndicates that are protected by corrupt politicians. And it's set in contemporary South Africa against the backdrop of 10 years of looting and corruption and what was called state capture in the country under former President Zuma, who was deposed at the end of 2017. And there's a new president who's seeking re-election, Cyril Ramaphosa, who's more in the Nelson Mandela tradition of driving the country forward and ending the looting, though it's taking far too long to do.
That's a good introduction. I think what makes both the rhino and the elephant conspiracy so chilling is that your knowledge of the politics of the country and the things that happen there. So although it's fiction, you feel like it could happen.
Well, it's based in that sense, that side of it is faction. So these are real life examples. They're real life examples of poaching and the threat of extinction to elephants and rhinos as well, and increasingly lions, which is likely to be the theme of my third one, the sequel to the elephant conspiracy, in turn the sequel to the rhino conspiracy. And yes, the political context in which they're set, though the characters are fictional, is based on real life. And indeed, some of the characters are based on real life as well, to those who are familiar with the country and its politics, so they'll probably identify that. But it's a fictional story, but it's not something kind of plucked from Mars. It's based on what happens in real life, although the twists and the turns are obviously entirely my own product.
So someone I interviewed recently said that their book was described as climate fiction.
What fiction?
As cli-fi or climate fiction.
Oh, right.
So like raising awareness of kind of the ongoing impact of the sort of climate change and things like that. Do you think that's an accurate description of kind of what you're writing as well? You've got a little bit of that in there, haven't you? Like the effect of global warming.
Yes, I think it's it wouldn't be accurate to describe it as simply climate fiction.
Oh no, absolutely not. But
very important theme, and it's one of the sub themes of the book, because the climate emergencies it is driving forward extinction of nature and different species on a prodigious scale, and ultimately the animals that feature in the book, the elephants and the rhinos, are all being affected by the climate emergency. So yes, it is climate fiction in that sense, but it's also wildlife fiction and political fiction all rolled in together.
And that's kind of the other part of my question for that, is that's kind of important in a way, isn't it? We need more fiction that raises awareness of what's happening to those animals and what people, to know what's happening so that we can know what we need to do to try and stop it.
Yes, and in the case of elephants, they're being killed or dying at a rate of 100 a day. And their numbers have drastically fallen from millions in the early early 19th century, before trophy hunters descended on the continent of Africa, and colonialism, of course, and European settlers had basically started decimating wildlife on an absolutely industrial scale. Elephants were killed thousands and thousands a day, so that they quickly plummeted over the next couple of centuries into tens of thousands rather than millions. And the same things happened to rhinos, not in as large numbers as elephants, because they never were in those numbers. Elephants roamed every part of the continent from North Africa right the way down to the southern tip, with the exception of the Sahara Desert, obviously. And so, and now they've been corralled into much, much smaller areas by the massive explosion of population of people and the population growth, so that a combination of human habitats encroaching on their natural habitats and poaching and the crime behind it of the export of the illegal export of elephant tusks in the main, which are a source of very valuable ivory on a scale of like rhino tusks, on the scale of gold for its value. And the international wildlife trade, the trafficking in wildlife parts, which is to satisfy, I think, obscene personal practices and behavior by rich elites, mainly, though not exclusively, in East Asia, in China and Vietnam, and countries like that, amongst the two prime sources. So they're trafficked through these international crime syndicates, and then consistently along the way, they're protected by by politicians and civil servants who are getting kickbacks and bribes in order to allow them to continue on their grisly decimation of wildlife.
We've got a couple of hellos already on the group. We've got one from Laura, who's quite a avid fiction reader.
Right.
One from Sam and one from Malcolm, who's another author. You are quite a prolific author in the sense of non-fiction, aren't you? You've got quite a lot of books.
Yes, I mean, my main speciality, over 20 books, has been non-fiction. My South African memoir, Pretoria Boy, was published last year by Icon Press in the UK, and by Jonathan Ball, who commissioned the book in South Africa. So yes, I'm mainly written about politics and current affairs, and a biography, the only short readable biography of Nelson Mandela. So this foray into fiction, into writing thrillers, is a new kind of branch off for me. But I've always enjoyed thrillers, and as a politician, certainly when I was in the cabinet for 7 years and as a government minister for 12 in all, as well as a member of parliament, I was reading a lot of documents and reports and so on all the time. And so an escape, just to get some downtime and to get a bit of time for myself, would be reading thrillers in the main, other fiction as well, but principally thrillers. And so the challenge of writing fiction is very, very different from the task of writing non-fiction, in which I'm relatively experienced. And I find it both exhilarating, but also much more demanding, actually, to try and get the characters right, and to do it in what's a lot of reviewers have been kind enough to say is a page-turning way. I don't know how you found it, Kaz, but with the Elephant Conspiracy, but I hope the story took you through the book at reasonably fast pace.
I very much enjoyed it. I enjoyed the Rhino Conspiracy a lot, and the Elephant Conspiracy, I think, follows on really well. You develop the characters, so you're returning to sort of characters that you know from the Rhino Conspiracy and learning more about them, which I thought was really good. That you sort of got a whole, like, there's an Irishman in this one, isn't there, who's quite an interesting guy.
Yes, that character who's without revealing the plot, becomes a gun for hire is a dissident Irish Republicans from the new IRA, which is a breakaway from the mainstream IRA and Sinn Féin, who entered into the democratic political framework and the peace process, beginning with the Good Friday Agreement under Tony Blair. And then I negotiated the deal in 2007 under Tony Blair that brought the bitter old blood enemies, Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness, Ian Paisley from the Democratic Unionists, Martin McGuinness from Sinn Féin, to share power together very amicably. So I know quite a lot about the island of Ireland, and particularly characters like Paddy Murphy that I create in the book. So yes, there's a new dimension to it. And the reason I wrote it, actually, I mean, the Rhino Conspiracy was written almost as a hobby. And then Muswell Press, marvelous small publishing house headed by two sisters, Sarah and Kate Beale, who are very experienced from mainstream publishing earlier on in their career, and then took the brave sort of venture of setting up their own publishing house, which is a pretty formidable challenge. And they asked me to, they published the Rhino Conspiracy, and then once it had been published, they said to me, well, we want to know what happens to the characters, particularly the heroine, a young black woman, Tunde Majeke, and it was left hanging at the end of the Rhino Conspiracy what actually decisions she'd make about her life. So they said, could you please tell us what's going to happen to her and others? So we want you to write another one, a sequel in a year. So that was very demanding. And I felt under quite a lot of pressure writing it in a way that I hadn't with the Rhino Conspiracy. And I'm very active on other matters in the House of Lords and various campaigning issues in my life as a politician. So I had to find the time and constantly drive forward on it. So it was a much more pressured task.
We've got some questions rolling in and some comments. So Leslie said hello as well. Laura said she watched a documentary recently on elephant conversation with someone that she's personal assistant for. They both found it fascinating for different reasons. She thought the fact that the ex-poachers locals were helping to move the elephants to reserves after removing their tusks was interesting. He was more interested in that the night-night medicine came in dark gun form.
Sorry, the what medicine?
And it says night-night medicine, so I guess the medicine that they send them to sleep with came in dark gun form.
Right. Yes, they would do. If you're seeking to poison or sedate elephants, sedation, if you're wanting to move them, which is quite a formidable task because they're giant beings, or if you're wanting to turn them unconscious in order to rip out their tusks, then yes, you dart them. That's what poachers do, and sometimes rangers do it in order to either move them to better terrain, perhaps a new safari park, but then poachers of course use it. There's in the elephant conspiracy, there's the use of cyanide licks to kill them, and then what they do is that loosens the tusks. I mean, it's a grotesque business, and then you can pull them out rather than hack them out bloodily as most poachers do. So it's a lot of the detail in the elephant conspiracy is not easy reading if you're an animal lover and a wildlife lover, but I think it's important that people know what happens.
It really is important. I did not know. I was going to ask you about the cyanide things that they used in it.
Yeah, well, I came upon this in my research for the thriller, and writing these two thrillers involves a lot of research, as does the third one, because I don't consider myself an expert in wildlife, and whether it's rhinos or elephants, although I've become more of a one since writing the two thrillers, and I'm now looking into the threat to lions, which I hadn't really appreciated the scale of until this year. There are actually fewer lions now than there are rhinos. And if you think of the decimation of the rhino population, then that's a pretty salutary fact for us all to observe. So there's a lot of research, and the way in which poachers go about their gruesome and bloody business is important to understand and also to describe in order to have a credible story, at least in that respect, even though some of the twists and turns are entirely fictional and thriller-like.
There is a lot of research in it, but there's also a lot of things that are based on you and your experiences in there as well, isn't there? And sort of people that you've known.
Yes, I mean there were in the Rhino conspiracy some of the main characters. The veteran, for example, who's an aging former freedom fighter and underground chief for Nelson Mandela's African National Congress when they were fighting apartheid. He's based on a real character who happens to be a friend of mine, and I'm not going to say who he is, but those who know both of us will know very well who he is. And he's been quite helpful in some of the granular detail associated with the character. But then, I have him playing a role that he's never played before. The young woman Tundi is entirely fictional, but her grandmother is based on somebody that I knew as a kid in South Africa. And some of the stories are based on what my parents did, and what others in the anti-apartheid struggle did. But then, and then the elephants, and the safari park is based on a magical safari park in KwaZulu-Natal, a province of South Africa called Tula Tula. And if anybody's read The Elephant Conspiracy, if you're interested particularly in the wildlife side of this and in elephants and their future and the threats to them, then Tula Tula is that's Thula, is an amazing place. And there was a book written about it called The Elephant Whisperer. So if you're interested in that, after you've bought The Elephant Conspiracy, hopefully, do read The Elephant Whisperer, because it's an incredible tale of the founder of this wildlife park and how he gets close to elephants that were pretty wild when they arrived, some of their number having been shot, and were therefore behaving understandably in a rogue way, and he had to get close to them to actually form a relationship that meant they could be integrated safely within the safari park. And now when you visit it, if you do, as I was able to do with Elizabeth, my wife, you can see some of the very elephants still who were, as youngsters, brought into the safari park many years ago.
One of the things I did after the Rhino conspiracy was go back to the bookstore and buy Pitch Battles, which you wrote.
Pitch Battles. Oh, yes.
Yeah. And there's a really interesting story in there that I wanted to ask you about, where you got smuggled in to South Africa through a documentary and you had to change your name.
Yes, in December 1989, I changed my name by deed poll because I was very well known in the country, in fact notorious in the white population for my sports apartheid protests to stop the Springboks playing, because they were whites only teams, as were all South African teams. You couldn't represent your country if you weren't white. So the great majority, the 90% of the country, 90% and more, were excluded from participation in representative sport. So Pitch Battles with my good friend Andre Oudendal, who lives in Cape Town and is a brilliant historian of the country. We wrote the story of the battle to achieve a non-racial sports system in which anybody can achieve their very best, regardless of the color of their skin. And of course, 50 years ago, when I was running on the pitch at Twickenham to stop the Springboks playing, so Saturday's match between England and the Springboks would have been exactly the kind of match that I and thousands of other demonstrators targeted back in 1969-70, England playing the Springboks. But then, of course, it was an all-white Springbok team. Now, the captain of the Springbok team happens to be a brilliant black player called Siya Kolisi. And the team is multiracial. So this is exactly what we fought for, was to get people chosen selected to represent their country on merit, not on the color of their skin.
And it's a fascinating read. So if anyone wants to, after branching out, from your fiction, it's a good read to go and delve into. I certainly learned a lot from reading.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's quite a large tome, isn't it? It's not like the Elephant Conspiracy, which is much more compact, should I say.
We've got a question here that said when they were learning more about you, they found a stunt coordinator called Peter Hain. Quite a different career path. If you hadn't taken the career path that you did, is there anything you would have liked to explore?
Well, certainly not being a stunt man. But when I was a kid, I really fancied being a racing driver. That because I was brought up by my dad to follow Formula One and motorsports, and I really fancied myself as being a racing driver. So that never materialized, and I have actually been driven around motor racing circuits like Silverstone and so on, and you know, it's pretty scary when you're going at high speed. So I don't think it would have been for me.
But it's good that you got to try it.
Oh yeah, I was very fortunate. You know, when you are, and I was a cabinet minister at the time. When you are, even as an MP, you see so much about life behind the scenes, and get opportunities to, for example, be driven around some 3 or 4 of the main international motor racing circuits at pretty high speed. But you know, you get as a local MP, you see how businesses work, you see how schools work, you see a lot that the average citizen would only see if they happen to be, say, a teacher in the case of a school, or a parent that's on the governor's parent, as a parent governor. Whereas I was able to go into a school and not only meet the children and talk to them and answer their questions, but also actually to get to know how things work. And that was true of almost every area of life, hospitals and local businesses and so on.
Did you sort of get drawn into a career as an MP because of your kind of activism?
Yes, really. I mean, I started off supporting my parents as a teenager and as a kid in South Africa, in Pretoria. As I said, that they were jailed, and then they were both issued with banning orders, which meant that they couldn't take part in any activity, even to meet relatives. They couldn't meet more than one other person at a time. And then they stopped my dad working, which is the reason we came to Britain in 1966. So yes, it was anti-apartheid activism and politics was in my DNA, really, through my parents. And I got increasingly involved in British politics and joined the Labour Party in 1977. Didn't expect to be an MP and never expected to be a minister when I became an MP, and certainly didn't expect to be a cabinet minister when I became a government minister. And the idea of becoming a member of the House of Lords, never ever entertained the idea of that. And no doubt the 20-year-old Peter Hain who was running on Twickenham would have been pretty astonished, if not pretty skeptical about his self 50 years later becoming a member of the House of Lords.
You've been asked, and we've gone completely away from fiction here. I promise you we will go back to your books.
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah.
Malcolm Hollindrake has asked who your favourite driver was as a child.
As a child, I liked John Manuel Fangio, who was the legendary Argentinian driver of the 1950s. Sterling Moss, also a great British driver. And then in more modern times, I'm a great admirer of Lewis Hamilton. I mean, he's the global. He is the British global superstar, and he's a very nice man as well. Has been an incredible driver, so I know him. And there are other. Michael Schumacher was a great. I tremendously admired him as well.
Laura has also said she's interested in both your fiction and your non-fiction. After all the documentaries she's been watching, she is Northern Irish, so remembers you as Secretary of State. Can't have been an easy job.
Right. No, I'm sure it wasn't. It's Laura, is it?
Yeah.
Laura. And Well, I hope you enjoy The Elephant Conspiracy if you're able to and want to read it, Laura, because the Irish character is pretty strong character. I'm not sure what your background is, but anybody living in Northern Ireland is aware of all the history and the tangled nature of it, and the unresolved issues as well. So I think you might find an added interest with the Irish character. Certainly, let me know via my parliamentary email, which is in the public domain, if you have an opinion about the guy, the guy who's nicknamed Paddy Murphy. I'd be very interested.
You include a very beautiful poem in this book.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, it's because of an incident where Tundi Majeke, who's a young woman, notionally in her mid-20s, that's not specified, faces a threat, a very, very severe threat. And the poem was a horrible incident. You, as a woman, probably you found it pretty horrible and threatening, I guess, Kaz, did you?
Yeah, it's a dark moment.
Yeah, a very dark moment. And I had to take the advice of women that I know in order to try and write it, because it's from a woman's point of view, something that happens to a woman and wouldn't happen to a man, at least not in anything like that way. And so she's pretty vulnerable afterwards. And a friend of hers gets her to read Touch, which is an incredible poem by somebody who was a great friend of our family, and I knew him well, called Hugh Lewin. And he was jailed for 7 years as a political prisoner, as an anti-apartheid activist, as a lot of people were. And he wrote this poem because he was beaten up in prison, and he was always harassed by white warders seeking to demean him and subjugate him. And he contrasts wanting to be touched in a tender way coming out of prison with the aggressive beatings that he had in prison. And it almost brings a tear to your eye, or does actually bring a tear to your eye when you read it. So the point of reproducing the poem, which I did by kind permission of his surviving partner, who's a friend of mine, was to convey both, on the one hand, the horror of being beaten, but also the desire to be touched tenderly, which the character Tundi feels after she emerges from this traumatic experience.
It brought a tear to my eye, I've got to admit.
Did it? Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it is very moving. Hugh Lewin himself was I don't regard myself as a brilliant writer. I hope I'm a readable writer, which is the purpose. But Hugh was a real literate craftsman, and he wrote a number of books. The one about his time in jail is called Bandit, Bandiet, which is Afrikaans, the other white, not exclusively white, but the other language apart from indigenous African languages, and of course English spoken in South Africa. It's kind of derived from Flemish and Dutch, and he's so bandit, which refers to, well, bandit, which is what they were called, political prisoners were called in jails by their white warders. They're very aggressive and violent white warders. So that's the title of his book, if anybody's interested in the whole story. But that poem is in there, as always, other poems.
You do reference some books in the back, don't you, for people?
Yeah, I don't know. That's probably quite unusual for a. This is that's the Elephant Conspiracy again. But it's quite unusual for a thriller to have references. But I thought for people, I don't know how you found it, Kaz, because obviously you read a lot of crime, and that's what your crime club is about. But I just thought if anybody wanted to read more about the wildlife side, or more about the South African side, or the different aspects of the story, then those were the sources I drew upon.
Yeah, I think it's really good, because I think, like you said, if there are people who are interested, so like I said, after I read The Rhino Conspiracy, I went away and bought other other books to sort
Right.
of learn more. But you know, it's nice to have those references. It's nice to be able to go and see that you could go and buy other things and learn from it and see where you've done your research as well. And like I said at the beginning, I think for me, what makes it such an amazing read is that depth of knowledge that you sort of put in it. So those personal experiences, that kind of knowledge that you know so much about the kind of the political experiences, the conspiracy, the sort of corruption that went on.
Yeah.
I think makes it more chilling.
It's still going on, unfortunately, I'm afraid, even though there's an attempt under the current president to clean it up. You know, corruption is like a cancer in the body. When it's deeply embedded, it's so difficult to strip out, so difficult to eradicate. And I suppose you get, probably you will agree, more so, I guess, in the rhino conspiracy, but also in the elephant conspiracy, is a real sense of anger at the betrayal of Nelson Mandela's freedom struggle and those who were part of his generation. Who, I mean, the idea of corruption just would leave him turning in his grave, frankly. And indeed, he was very, very critical of the way the country was going in the latter part of his life.
Do you so you say you're going to write The Lion? I presume you don't have a title yet, but the next
No, and it's a kind of working title, but I'll save that as a surprise for now because it may change. But yeah, I've started to look much more at lions, and that will feature, just like rhinos are at the center of the rhino conspiracy. There was a much broader tale, if you like, and the same is true of the elephant conspiracy. Yeah, I'm looking much more at lions because I'm really become very worried about it. The elephant conspiracy is also distinct because I got involved in exposing, under parliamentary privilege in the House of Lords, international money laundering and the fact that a lot of global corporates, a lot of global businesses, household names like KPMG, the auditors, and McKinsey, the consultants, Bain and Company, the management consultants, banks like HSBC and Standard Chartered and Bank of Baroda, were all intrinsic to this this corruption and this looting, because the money that was looted was moved out through their accounts from Johannesburg to Dubai and to Hong Kong in the main, and then washed around the financial the financial institutions and banks, and sometimes came back into the country undetected to be spent. This is taxpayers' money that was looted, then spent on private ventures. So there's that side of it much more in the elephant conspiracy, because I had to get to know this world in order to expose it in Parliament.
I quite like that sort of way that they deal with things as well. You know, that kind of use of parliamentary privilege to expose the things. It's a very unique sort of twist in a thriller, isn't it? Using that.
Yeah, there's one of the characters in the book who's a member of Parliament in a way that I was. I'm a member of the House of Lords, so I'm still in the British Parliament, but in the subsidiary chamber. And I've used parliamentary privilege quite well. Whenever you speak in Parliament, you're speaking under privilege. You can't be sued, whatever you say. But I've used it particularly to expose injustice, including corruption in South Africa, because I was asked to do it. So there's a lot of that side of it, the money laundering, the international corruption that is then allied to the poaching and the illegal wildlife trade by these criminal syndicates. And it's big money, you know, Kaz. I mean, it's on a par with the drug trade and even the arms trade and human trafficking as well, international crime of that kind. Wildlife crime is billions of dollars a year. And of course, the ones who suffer the most are the animals who are being killed just out of human greed and these obscene personal, really, I mean, I find that hard to, if you imagine that that rhino tusks are ground down into powder that is then used in East Asia in the main by rich elites as a cocaine substitute or as an aphrodisiac. There's, by the way, no scientific proof that rhino horn powder is any good for either of those purposes, but it's an elite hobby and used for that, and they're paying masses of money, which ultimately fuels this wildlife trade, with the local poachers being poor villagers in the main who are trying to put food on the tables of their families and survive. That's not in any way to excuse them, because they're doing the bloody work, but they're not paid very well compared with the international criminals on top of them and the politicians who've been bought off. But the money they get is incomparably better than what they can try to earn, even being a local ranger. So, you get game park rangers being killed, local safari parks across the African continent. Many are like war zones, with poaching increasingly militarized, the hardware, the drones, all sorts of other devices used to target the animals and to make sure that the poachers get away with what they've come for, whether it's rhino horns or elephant tusks or lion claws and teeth, which seem to be the main attraction. And this is big business, and it's big crime. And it's, when I say war zones, I mean a lot of killing of rangers. I think there have been 1,000 rangers killed in the last few years. That's a lot of people whose life mission is conservation and the protection of these precious animals.
Do you think that with your book about the lions, that will be the end of that story, or do you have plans for more after that?
I'm not even thinking about that at the moment. I've just got, I'm 50,000 words in rough draft into the lion, the one focus on on lion wildlife. But it covers wildlife in general so far. And what I find is I had with the first two books, the Rhino Conspiracy and the Elephant Conspiracy, a basic theme and an idea. But then you find yourself, and you probably encountered this talking to other crime writers and thriller writers, you find it takes a life of its own, and it leads you off down byways and paths that you hadn't particularly expected. And that's actually I've heard other thriller writers say exactly the same thing, that it evolves in the course of writing it. And you always hit sort of roadblocks when you're writing any book, I've found. And I deal with that by then going on to part of the story that is easier for me to write and then coming back to the one that's had a bit of a blockage, probably having helped solve the blockage and unblock it in the course of it. But I'm still unsure, though I've already started writing the end without having written a large chunk of the middle of the next thriller, the third in the series. But I'm not quite sure how they're all going to connect up. And this one is being set in mainly in South Africa, but also in Kenya, because I visited a safari park with Elizabeth in February this year in the Masai Mara, which is an incredible area with rich in wildlife, but also under threat. And the Masai, of course, are an important part of Kenyan culture, and have a traditional. They have chiefdoms that are part of Africa's rich history. So I'm having to kind of find ways of connecting the two safari experiences, the two wildlife arenas. But I've already started to do that. And then when we went to Cotters, it is an extraordinary. It was a privilege. We were able to pick up a safari trip which others couldn't do, and asked whether we wanted to take advantage of it. And then we went to Zanzibar as well for the first time. So Zanzibar comes into this thriller too. So starting to spread out across Africa with wildlife very much, as well as international crime and poaching and gangsterism at the heart of it.
You're quite good at bringing in a rich kind of cast of sort of outside characters as well. I don't know if I've described that the best way that I could, but your sort of core characters are really interesting. I like the fact we've discussed it before that you don't name them, and I get your reasons for that. But you
I
also
name some of them. I give
you
some of
name
them
some of them,
names,
so you
others I
don't,
don't. Yeah.
others you don't. But then there's like these sort of other characters that come in every story that are just there for that one, and they're
Yeah.
always really rich and interesting as well.
Oh, good. Well, in the Elephant Conspiracy, there's, for example, a banking executive, a young woman who becomes a whistleblower, because there are, in a lot of these situations, you only learn about them because brave people alert the world to what's going on and pay a heavy price as a result very often. So there is a young banking executive, a character that I've created, who has a name in this one, in the Elephant Conspiracy. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting constructing new characters and trying to do that. But I'm also conscious you can't fill the book up with too many characters, otherwise they get in the way of the story, don't they?
So they do, but I think you sort of find a good balance where the characters are very real people doing
Good.
sometimes quite extraordinary things, but
Yeah.
you sort of believe them. They're very real feelings in those situations that they're put in. You know, they react in very human ways, which for a thriller I think is very refreshing.
Great. Great. Well, you've been very complimentary about it, Kaz, and I'm grateful to you. And I hope that others who might, including as a result of this interview, want to read The Elephant Conspiracy will find it as enjoyable as you have, luckily for me.
Well, you know, it's good when you sort of find books that you enjoy like that, isn't it? One of the questions I've asked every author I've interviewed this year so far, and I'm doing it purely for my own selfish reasons, is what books have you enjoyed reading this year?
Well, I read Sam Bourne quite a lot, but I've also, partly because I did a festival, a literary festival with her. It was online in the middle of COVID. I've read also Sarah Saltoun's thrillers, which are very arresting and very gritty. I don't know if you've come across them, The Source and The Shot, but I'd really recommend them because they are. I mean, I've given an endorsement for her third thriller, so she's ahead of me in the in the thriller writing. But I describe it as it gets under your skin because it's really it leaves you kind of almost feeling a bit uncomfortable. But it's a brilliant read, and she does it very well. So
Oh,
I've read Sarah's book, Sarah Saltoun's two thrillers so far, and actually before publication, in order to give an endorsement, the third one too. I also met James Brabazon, the thriller writer, when we were doing this literary festival, the three of us, Sarah, myself, and him. So I've read a couple of his books too. He's was it Lee Childs who's the thriller writer, I think, who, you know, somebody gets killed almost every day, every page. It's a kind of, that's an exaggeration, but it's like drama at a very fast pace of a shocking kind happening all the time. My thrillers are more paced, you know, they go up and down with dramatic moments and then moments of exploration and inquiry and investigation and so on. James Brabazon's a bit in the Lee Child category. So I read his. I read Sarah Saltoun's and Sam Bourne. Sam Bourne, of course, is a nom de plume for Jonathan Freedland, the Guardian newspaper columnist, who I happen to know. And by the way, I read Gerald Seymour a lot. Gerald Seymour, I think, is a masterful thriller writer. You've probably read him or come across him, and he
I've
like
come across him. I haven't read him.
yeah, he has a very different style, but he's somebody else like Jonathan Freedland who I I met actually during the campaign to stop the Springboks in 50 years ago when he was a reporter for ITN. So he was an television news reporter, and then he went into thrillers as other television reporters have done. I think Gavin Esler is it, and also Tom Bradbury. So I have a connection with him, and I've just got his latest one, The Outsiders, and I'll continue to be lookout for the next one.
I'm quite a fan of Tony Kent's thrillers. He's a criminal barrister.
Oh right, I've not come across him actually. I'll have to look him up.
They're very out there. They're often set in America, but they're quite.
I was talking to my grandson, 10-year-old grandson, about what he was reading, and he I don't know if you've come across it, but he's actually in advance of his age for reading. So let's talk about early teens. There's this character called Alex Rider, who's a James Bond type figure for that age group of teenagers, early teenagers, and he's I think read 7 or 8 of them. So it's obviously within the family DNA that I like adult thrillers and he likes teenage ones. But the way he describes it, they seem pretty pacey.
They're really good. He probably liked the Cherub series as well by Robert Muchmore. They're very similar.
Cherub series. All right, I'll watch it to him. You mean CHERUB?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
It's about like children spies.
Oh, right.
They're employed by like a genuine spy agency as spies and sent out into places because no one will believe that a child could be a spy. But they're very similar to kind of Alex Rider in that way. They're quite good.
Okay. I'll tell him about it.
You have a quote from David Attenborough on the front of your book.
Yeah. I mean, it's a generally used, it's a quote that he generally used because, of course, he's the ultimate authority on the threat to our planet and to humankind as a result. And where he says, I think he says the question is, are we happy to suppose that our grandchildren may never be able to see an elephant except in a picture book? And that's a very arresting quote because basically he's saying that elephants are on the brink of extinction, which they are, as are rhinos, as are lion. Humankind is the most destructive species in the history of the planet. We've got a lot to answer for. And so David Attenborough's alerted us all to it. The question is, what is actually done about it? And although my thrillers are written for enjoyment and for people to be taken into that world, they're also, I hope, alert people to real social and wildlife and environmental as well as political and criminal issues.
And I think that's a good thing that fiction can do, isn't it? You can write a book that is exciting and interesting, but you can also make people aware of issues and maybe think about things in a way that they wouldn't.
Yeah. For example, Gerald Seymour's one of his recent books set in the in Russia is about a cyber criminal center, and there are a number of these in Russia. So he always gives a kind of real life context to it, and some of the best thrillers I think do. Others are just pacey. Like Lee Child doesn't particularly put a real life context in it, or in that historical geopolitical background. But Gerald Seymour does, and in a particular context. So I think that's what I'm trying to do as well.
Yeah, and I think that's good because I like the fact that they have a context.
Yeah.
I think for me, and maybe for people who are having a gateway into sort of reading thrillers, I'm not a sort of, I don't read a lot of thrillers, but
you more read what you'd badge as crime rather than thrillers, although they all come under sort of a common banner, I suppose, don't they?
Yeah, probably. I'm more of a kind of cozy crime little old ladies solving crimes kind of crime
Yeah.
reader than a people running around with guns and
Yeah.
things kind of crime reader.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other questions, Kaz, from people who are engaged in this?
Not as yet. I think we've covered most of them.
Okay.
So, one of our favourite questions, though, as a group, is to ask people what their most memorable moments are as an author.
Most memorable moments. Well, I suppose for me, seeing wildlife having the privilege to see wildlife in its natural habitat, because it was seeing the rhinos, realizing that they were under 24/7 guard, and then becoming interested in the hardware of poaching and the extent of it and the crime and the corruption around it. Um, and for example, in the Masai Mara at Cotter's camp, we saw a baby rhino which was about 10 minutes old that had been dropped by its mother, and that actually features in the third thriller I'm writing now as one of the incidents, because you get these amazing incidents when you go into a wildlife park. You see things that you never imagined seeing often, and it took quite a while because the mothers just drop them. So you've got these big tall animals which are a significant way off the ground, their bellies and where the babies are dropped from them, and then they're not. It's not like a human birth. It's just literally thump on the ground from a couple of meters. So and they land, and then they've got to then begin the process of survival. And watching this, we arrived just after it had been born, and our ranger said, "Now let's just stop and watch it trying to get up," which it tried to heave itself up on a number of occasions because of course never walked before in its minutes old life. So they're memorable things like that I've tried to capture. I suppose that's one of the most striking ones.
What do people make of your fiction if they've come to knowing you from your political life or your non-fiction life? What's the reception been of you as a fiction author?
Well, people have been very generous about it. I think intrigued, and generous and intrigued on the whole. And some of them have been pleasantly surprised, and some of them who are political activists and friends from the political world, everybody, you may not believe it, but politicians have private downside lives too. And I think some of them it's opened their eyes to a world that they're partly part of, but mostly not. And in terms of former anti-apartheid activists, who are people living in South Africa who are familiar with what's going on in the country, because it's been published by Muswell Press over here, who the main publishers, but then it's been distributed and published out in South Africa at the moment by Jonathan Ball Publishers, one of perhaps the leading publisher in South Africa alongside Penguin. So there's a lot of interest in South Africa as well about these thrillers from people who will recognize some of the characters more than necessarily a British audience would.
You've got a few comments, and then we're going to show off the elephant conspiracy again before we finish. Got about 2 minutes.
Okay.
Someone said, "Thank you for an interesting hour. They look forward to reading your books, Peter. I've raved about them." I'm guessing that's Sam. Malcolm has said, "Thanks for a fascinating interview." Laura has said, "Thanks, both very interesting. She will definitely be reading them at some point." She looks at her wibbly wobbly to be read file.
Well, I hope you enjoy them. That's the main purpose.
Remind people of what they're going to buy. Show off the elephant conspiracy. If you've got a copy of the rhino conspiracy, show us that.
I'd have to run downstairs and get a rhino conspiracy, I'm afraid.
Let's just stick with this one then.
It features rhinos on the cover against the background of the African continent as well. So it's another quite striking cover. And that's the first one. This is the sequel to it.
But both could be read as standalones.
Oh, yes. indeed. You know, you don't need to have read the Rhino Conspiracy in order, I hope, to enjoy the Elephant Conspiracy, and that's one of the things that I had to kind of try to master, which is to write a distinct book, but yet one that is actually a sequel on an entirely new terrain as well.
And then all that's left from me to say is thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on, and I'm again very grateful that you've enjoyed both books so far, but particularly recently The Elephant Conspiracy so much, and that's an encouragement to finish writing the third one, Kaz.
Yeah, it definitely is. You need to write the third one. It'll be excellent.
Thank you very much. You've been very generous and kind.
Yeah, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.